Welcome, I guess. So, you were brought here by a taxidermic interest in obscure writers. Well, if that's the case, let me tell you what this book thinks of intellectuals. Parthenogenetic, sensitive as an amoeba, inhibited, high-strung, bloated with theories like a turkey, sick with your conscience and principles, eternally in some dilemma, and of course you had a beautiful childhood. So, discomfortable already? Maybe this book isn't for you. There's no point in pursuing a read that questions our superior ability to think about our favorite topic ourselves. There's a ton of more pandering alternatives out there we can all click on, including myself, so go ahead and feel free. We'll still remain friendos. Still here? Great that you've decided to stick around. We might just get somewhere. Because at least you know, masochists are great learners. So the main character of this book is one Konrad Rutkowski. And Rutkowski is a German history professor who decides to revisit, in the 1960s, the Mediterranean city of D, where he served in World War II as an officer of the Gestapo. Still, at heart, he wasn't a hardcore baddie. Listen to this recollection of his war deeds. On page 38. Namely, I'm the only man in the whole damned Sonderkommando with, according to his human and intellectual conscience, inclined to do anything for our unfortunate prisoners. But the thing with intellectuals is that their deeds always fall short from their words. The reality of having to save their precious asses when push comes to shove makes illiterate knuckleheads of them all. In a series of letters to his brother-in-law, Rutkowski starts to unravel his past in a decreasingly benign fashion. The tidy, apologetic compartmentalization of his war memories crumbles in the face of the present. He even dares to stay in his former HQ, which is now converted into a hotel. And it's the thing with intellectuals, always so concerned about the big picture, but it's usually the pesky details that sidewind them. Rutkowski's crash from his ivory tower is enhanced by the fact that the proud giants of thought that helped him shape his worldview abandon him too mercilessly. All of the letters to his brother-in-law start with the name of a famous philosophical work, From Meditations to Beyond Good and Evil, and they were placed there by the fictional editor of the book to reflect the spirit of each individual confessional letter. You can see there's a string of genius at work in here, and their works combined aren't enough to prevent Rutkowski's brain from dissolving into guilt. And this is indeed a foundational idea of the book. The intellectuals we revere and cheer were mostly omnishambles who most likely led utterly miserable and unhappy lives. Those uber sapiens suffered from having married the ghastliest looking entity on planet Earth, reality. Nobody ever sane or well integrated decided to ever write a book to compliment the rest of us for our deeds. No, they usually decide to write it to settle a score, to settle a dispute with the world that forced them to compromise on issues such as morals, money, success, whatever. And like Rutkowski, who compromised on his morals to serve in the Gestapo, the more the intellectuals are forced to compromise by reality, the more convoluted and strenuous their intellectuals' efforts become, which again leads to more compromise. There's a statistically abnormal representation of the same nihilist misfits in any library. Of course, they are there to challenge you, to stimulate you, but let's face it, they're also there to water the delicate plant of our exceptionalism. The devotion to the task of creating a better world in our minds enamors us with our own souls, and it legitimizes the distance we intend to keep from the perceived baseness of the world. This intellectual hate to reality is usually internalized and seen from such sentences as, I hate the current state of affairs, arts, music, theater these days, I hate the state of politics. but it is diabolically terrifying when it becomes politically orientated. Listen to the most infamous example in history of the one whose name we must not mention. Page 154. The detonator of the hatred for the Jews, along with the instructions for its use, was implanted into Adolf by philosophers. His racial theories were based on such ghastly works as The Aryans and Their Social Role. And in its context, a disdain for the weak, sick and unfortunate, disgraced and ignominious, was sparked by an academic monstrosity such as the fitness of our race and the protection of the weak by Alfred Plotz, medical doctor. The wise old Schopenhauer taught him the gloomy and hopeless pessimism that enabled the product of two other minds, Darwin's struggle for survival and Malthus' specter of overpopulation, to be happily joined into a brutal settling of accounts with the human race. Indeed, the intellectual and philosophical maturity of the 20th century was an alibi to some of its bloodiest social experiments. Millions of pages were devoted to rendering human experience totally abstract, which contaminated political action too, rendering it sort of abstract too. A great example of this sort of circular, self-sufficient logic is seen from the likes of Rutkowski's boss, Standartenführer Steinbrecher. Steinbrecher is a cool character because he just revels in instigating Rutkowski's conundrums. Listen to this on page 35. I really enjoyed this exchange between the two of them. Am I to understand you as considering our situation to be permanently shitty? Not at all, Herr Standartenführer. That's heartening. Otherwise, I would have to have you shot for defeatism. So you don't think we're in a difficult position? No, sir. Of course I don't think so. That's disappointing, Rutkowski. It seems that in the end, I'll have to shoot you anyway. But why, Herr Standartenführer? For subversive negligence. At a moment when we're retreating on all fronts and our cities are going up in phosphorescent flames, your senseless optimism undermines the German war effort. So, reason does not mark the end of Rutkowski's torment. The fear of death, the least abstract thing on planet Earth, corners him completely. Or maybe he was just done in by the demonic presence of an umbrella. You'll just have to read to find out who is the real vampire in the story. So this book is especially indicated to everybody who, like myself, believe their shit not to stink, or everybody who's pondering being subject to police questioning. That's extremely useful in both those situations. And if you're wondering if Pekic is all talk, let me fill you in on a little known episode of his biography. He was constantly incarcerated as a political nuisance in Yugoslavia. At one time, he was being liberated from another period of incarceration, and he refused to leave jail until the original ball pen he handed over to the authorities at the start of his sentence was restored to him. A million other ball pens were offered to him, but still he refused to leave until they gave him his original ball pen. You can see that Pekic, he did not only talk the talk, he walked the walk. So let's wrap up. You kind folks, enjoy, and remember, integrity always comes at a very high cost. Ta-da!